So VLK, the architecture firm, and just the business community in general, why do they care about testing and accountability?
I believe that they feel like it's part of the learning process. Is how do you know kids, our students, know what they're supposed to know? You have to have a test. Everybody has a test to do certain fields. You have to qualify, certification tests, etc. So I think it's integral to that. But I also think business leaders know that that's not where learning stops. And so I think that's where the conflict is now in 2025, is they know that testing, whether it be SAT, ACT, STAAR, or whatever the test is only a test. And I think they feel like assessment's important because they want to know we're going the right direction as a country. They get a lot of noise about we're doing well, we're not doing well, and so how do we know? And assessment becomes an answer to that.
So why not just get rid of testing and accountability just in general?
Well, as a parent, as an educator, as a now working in business, is because we need to know if our kids are growing. And this is really the big difference, okay? If you look at STAAR, STAAR is a high accountability test. It's about meeting a standard. It's a criterion reference test, which you meet certain standards and check they're on grade level. Whereas other assessments, such as MAP growth, and there's others, is the child growing? And frankly, as a parent, and again, as an educator and now working in business, all I care is about, are you improving? And I don't believe you stop improving all the way through life. I know plenty of 70 and 80-year-olds that are still learning. And so I actually feel like the accountability systems are actually negatively affecting learning because people feel like, now I'm done. I've taken that, now I'm done. No, you're never done. And whereas growth allows you not only to have that growth mentality, but allows you to see if a child is not meeting standard, that you can go in at that moment and help support them.
Because there is a theory from teachers or parents where they'll go, why not just let the teachers teach? Why do you have to measure them like you do?
Right. Well, I think there's certainly a wide continuum of how you respond to that. On one bookend is you just let people do what they want to do in the classroom. On the other end, you heavily organize, require, and assess it. I think the problem is we have extremes on both sides. I don't think the answer is just let people do what they want to do because their standards could be potentially low or don't meet the needs of all the kids in their classroom. I think it's somewhere in the middle. We've gone to the other end where it becomes all about the test. The problem is the test only tests certain elements of the curriculum. So usually it's reading, writing, math, science, social studies, and all those things are important. But it doesn't teach all of the advanced areas. It doesn't get into calculus. It doesn't get into some of the advanced sciences. I taught German. It doesn't get into languages. It doesn't get into the career and technology areas, which a lot of business leaders find are important. And I'll tell you, in my career, there's a general perception that people don't want accountability. They don't want assessment. I have not found that to be true at all. What they want it to be fair. They want it to be clear. They want it to meet needs, and they want it to be useful and practical.
So am I hearing you correctly that the problem isn't with testing and accountability in general? The question is does STAAR fit the need for today?
Well, I think STAAR is like any test. I don't believe STAAR is a bad test. We're in what people call affectionately STAAR 2.0. It's the next version of the test. I don't think it's a bad test. I don't think the first STAAR was a bad test. I don't think any of the assessments are just bad in their existence. The problem is what you do with them. So as I mentioned earlier, the narrowing of the curriculum, our understanding that you're testing a child on one day. And so you could pick a child on their worst day. Maybe something terrible has happened the day before in their life. They come in, they don't care about the exam for that day because they've lost a loved one, and that happens, or they're sick. And so their scores reflect that, and all of a sudden we put this kid on a list because they're underperforming in an area when really it has to do with something happened outside of school. Whereas when we do the assessments ourselves and we control that factor, we have more control over that and realize, hey, this is not the best day to give you this assessment. Let's hold on this and let's wait. And how many times does that happen in the classroom? You come in, you look ill and say, I was up all night, I was sick. Tell you what, why don't you come tomorrow after school and finish that test? Yet on STAAR, we're like, no, that starts at 9 o'clock. Good or bad, that's when it starts. And I think that's a problem.
So the idea of breaking it up into smaller tests, the idea is 3 from what I understand right now, or that's what it was in the legislative session. You're supportive of that, the business community is supportive of that, you think it's... So what is the sticking point that
the
it's
sticking
still the
point-
hurdle to get over.
Yeah, the sticking point for most educators, and not to speak for everybody, but people that I have visited with, and if I was back in the chair, is that are you going to apply those same standards that you have on STAAR? Now you do it 2-3 times a year, and you have had this high stakes. I mean, school, you can't even go on campus. Parents can't eat lunch, elementary with their elementary kids. You can't have any programs. Extracurriculars are paused. So now we're going to do that 3 times. And so the answer to this is to do it. We do testing now. This is the interesting thing. If you look at virtually any school in any school district, they are testing kids 3 times a year informally within their own assessments, using a MAP assessment, the growth assessment that's through the NWEA, or a locally developed exam, and they're using what's beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. They do the end of the year right before STAAR to see, are we online? It is aligned. They're usually aligned with the state's.
They call those benchmarks when
Yes.
I was in school.
Yeah,
Okay.
benchmarks.
Okay.
And as we know, benchmarks have to be they have to be given, and if you don't do anything with those scores, then it goes back to it being irrelevant. But if you use that, then you can adapt your curriculum accordingly. And so school districts would be all for that. And so that would mean trusting local school districts to put in systems like this with state requirements, but they implement them locally rather than trying to try to do that at the state level.
Yeah. So if the business community, the education community, the parents, it seems like everybody wants to change the STAAR.
Yes, absolutely.
What gets in the way?
I think that the fear of giving local control is part of it, and not from parents. In my career, I would believe most parents, whether they're friends of mine or whether they're parents that were constituents, they're not big fans of the STAAR. And part of it is they feel like that it creates unnecessary stress on their kids, and I underline unnecessary. Life is stressful, but there's stress that's good, and there's stress that's just absolutely unnecessary.
But when you say that the fear of local control or the skepticism of local control, is there a belief that, if you let too much control happen on a local level, that some districts will fall behind?
Right. I believe they feel like some will fall behind, some will change the standards, some will just simply do what they want to do, maybe adapt and go in directions that they're not comfortable with. And also, you can't compare districts in the same way.
Oh,
So
okay.
when
That's interesting, yeah.
When you give a statewide assessment, everybody gets the same assessment, then theoretically, everything is equitable. And I say theoretically because we know that there are certain factors that factor in to how students perform, whether they're limited English proficiency. You have students that have incredible economic disadvantaged effects of what's going on in their lives, so homeless students, so forth. You have mobility. If you're not familiar with this, mobility itself has one of the highest correlations of negative performance, no matter your socioeconomic level, whether you're wealthy or poor. If you move a lot, you have more difficulties, and we know that with the military, and that's why we do more wraparound services with children of the military, and we know that. Yet, when you're comparing districts, it doesn't take into effect that the kids you had on the day of testing may be different kids than you have at the end of the year. I mean, at the beginning of the year the next year.